So what is hard surface modeling? Now it seems pretty obvious that tanks, guns, and cars are all hard surface modeling, but this is an organic model. Now the majority of this tank is definitely hard surface. It's a really hard surface and there's no need to discuss that. But when we bend the gun of this tank, the gun of the tank is no longer a hard surface object. In fact, it becomes an organic object. And the reason that it's not a hard surface object is because it no longer has the defining elements of a hard surface object. So we're going to break down 5 defining elements of hard surface objects, and then we're going to be able to differentiate between hard surface objects and organic objects. And to demonstrate some good examples, we have a few objects here. We have some properly hard surface object over here. This is the tank. We have some kind of hybrid hard surface organic objects, and we have a properly organic object, which is this monkey over here on the side. Obviously, it's a fully organic object. There's nothing hard surface about it, right? But let's talk about the other few objects, and let's talk about the first example, which makes a hard surface object. That is the presence of straight lines as opposed to curved lines, because in nature there are no straight lines, right? So a hard surface object is going to have a lot of straight lines and straight edge loops. Like for example, if you look at this tank over here, it has a lot of very straight edge loops, like in the front over here. It has straight lines separating these panels over here. All of it is a lot of it is just straight lines or vertices put into straight lines. You won't see any of that on a fully organic object like this monkey over here. There are no straight lines. All of it is slightly curved and bent and flowing cleanly. There are no straight lines. We're not looking at the individual edges over here because that doesn't really count. Now when you look at it that way, it's going to start to make sense why I said that this object over here is not hard surface, because if we look at the gun on this object, you can see that there are no straight lines because it's all slightly bent and crooked and it's all a little bit curved. So it looks a little bit more like an organic object rather than like a hard surface object, right? Obviously the rest of the tank is still completely hard surface, but this loses that one element that makes a hard surface object, all right? And the second thing that we're going to notice that only appears in hard surface objects as opposed to organic objects are sharp edges, all right? You can see on this tank, once again, there's a whole bunch of little sharp edges, all these little panels and all these little cuts and all these little bits on the wheels and everything. It's all got these sharp 90-degree or more angles between the faces and the edges, all right? But you will not see that on a more organic object like this shoe. Well, maybe this shoe, because this still is a man-made object, so it's got some cuts in the fabric and whatnot. But you will definitely not see on this on the monkey, right? There are no sharp edges on the monkey. They're all slightly smooth and bent or beveled or kind of subdivided, and there really aren't any sharp edges the same way that they appear on the tank, right? So that is definitely one thing that identifies a hard surface model. The third thing that we can notice is that on hard surface objects there are some completely flat faces and surfaces, right? For example, if we look at the top of the hull of this tank, or the front of the hull of this tank, or the sides, or if we look at the top of the turret, there are plenty of flat surfaces which are completely flat, so multiple faces put together which are completely flat, right? You will not see that in nature. Once again, there are no completely flat surfaces, right? If we look at the shoe over here, there are no large surfaces which are completely flat, right? Even though this is a kind of hybrid object. Well, maybe at the bottom we can see some flat surfaces, which is kind of the part that would make this shoe a little bit more hard surface rather than organic. But once again, if we go to the monkey, we're not going to see any flat surfaces at all, right? We can see some surfaces which are a little bit more flat than others, like maybe the top of this eye over here, or the tip of the eye. But we won't see any completely flat large surface or multiple faces put together which together make up a completely flat surface, right? Now inspecting the edge loops is another way to differentiate between hard surface objects and organic objects, right? Let me show you what I mean by that. If I go here to my tank and I go to edit mode and I select an edge loop, like for example this side of the tank here, by holding down Alt and right clicking, I'm going to select 2 edges over here, maybe 4 edges up here. Maybe I can get a slightly bigger edge loop up here somewhere, all right? But generally, they're all going to be pretty finite, and they're all going to be kind of short, right? They're only going to lead from one point to the other, right? So the edge loops are not going to be very long. But on an organic object, we're generally going to get a lot longer edge loops, all right? Again, this object doesn't quite qualify completely because it's not really it's still a man-made object, so it's still cut in places and stuff like that, but you won't really see the shape in nature. But on an organic model like a monkey, most of these edge loops are just going to be infinite, right? So if we select an edge loop here, it just goes, well, this is not a good example, but maybe we can select something in the ear. You can see that it just turns into this ugly mess, and it's pretty much an infinite edge loop that goes all the way all around these different places. It twists in itself, and we have the different edge loops over here that they don't lead from one point to the other. They just go in circles all over the place, and they connect back to themselves. So the edge loops are clearly very different. So that's another way to separate hard surface from organic models, right? And one more thing that tends to separate hard surface models from organic models is the number of loose parts that the model has, right? Let me show you what I mean by that. If I go over here to my tank, all right? And if I select everything and then I press P and I separate everything by loose parts, all right, that's going to separate all the objects which are not directly connected to each other. You will see that all of a sudden everything is turned into 150 different objects. I don't even know how many we have, but every single little object or every single little item is a different object in itself, right? So they're not connected to each other. Every individual screw is a separate object. These are called loose parts, right? So hard surface models generally have a whole bunch of different loose parts that they're made up of, right? Every single wheel is different, every track is different, everything is a different loose part. But if we go to the monkey, we're gonna see that everything is well connected. So if we go over here and we separate everything by loose parts, we're still gonna have just one object. In this case, we have three objects because the eyes are separate objects. And this is where you also might be able to find a sharp edge, which of course sometimes happens on an organic object. But generally speaking, they have a lot less loose parts, and an organic object is generally going to be just like one large organic mass, right? Just one piece, which is molded together rather than put together as a hard surface object, right? So not all of these elements are going to appear in all objects, and they're not exclusive in the sense that if you find one of these the features in an object, it's definitely a hard surface object. That's not the case, right? It's kind of a combination of all of them, but these are just some things that you will tend to notice in hard surface objects as opposed to organic objects, right? So I hope that makes the difference between hard surface modeling and organic modeling a little bit more clear to some of you guys. If you enjoyed the video, drop a like, drop a comment, subscribe to the channel, and I'll see you guys in the next one.